A very good evening and warm welcome to Breaking Today News right here at Switch TV. My name is Lincoln Obogo, sign language interpreter. Is Teresia Washira. We have a lot prepared for you tonight, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. Clinical workers issue the government with irreducible minimums and a 14 days strike notice. DCI officers arrest 44 underage children in night raid at Mountain View Estate. And Kenya is in talks with the IMF to secure another loan facility to cushion its economy from the coronavirus pandemic crisis. We are live on Twitter, YouTube and Facebook at Switch TV Kenya. You can send in your feedback to our SMS line 111 and at Lincoln Ombogo and at Switch TV Kenya and all our social media handles. On to the top stories tonight. The Kenya Union of Clinical Officers has today mourned the death of Senior Specialist Clinical Officer Ophthalmology and Cataract Surgery, Dr. David McCorry. They have also insisted on the agreement with the government over the medical cover for health workers after talks with relevant authorities, giving a 14-day strike notice. Yakundi Calvin reports.
Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in Kenya, health workers have shown a remarkable resilience in containing the pandemic.
The Kenya Union of Clinical Officers today gives a 14-day strike notice, and we are going to go out because these things that we are mentioning today are not out of space. These are actually bare minimums that we're not supposed to be negotiating about, but the government has pushed us to a situation where we have to keep asking for the basics for us to be able to offer services to Kenyans effectively.
Medical practitioners have been largely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, with doctors getting infected and succumbing to the virus since its insurgence.
Why would you withhold a salary when the exchequer has already actually given out? Some things like promotions are provided for. But because we have been subjected to political management as health workers, that is why you're having all these problems.
We have said that we need PPEs to be provided at all levels. Yesterday during our meeting, it became quite eminent that all the policies that have been put in place by the Ministry of Health have not been followed.
The Health Ministry is still asking for promotions in all cadres and budgetary allocation on the medical cover for health workers across the country. They have also given a 14-day strike notice for all medical workers. Nyakundi Calvin, Switch TV.
Thank you, Nyakundi Calvin, for that story. Elsewhere, the KURIA community may not support the BBI report if the issues are not addressed, particularly the need to have their own county, citing historical injustices since they claim that they cannot have executive leaders in the current Migori County government. Zach Babere, a politician and youth leader who is also Deputy President William Ruto's ally, has urged the BBI technical team to feature issues of marginalized communities in the report. Babere has also drummed up support for Deputy President William Ruto's 2022 presidential bid. Take a look.
Hapa Kuria hakuna BBI. Hapa Kuria kama unataka tuongee tuelewane, lakini mkitaka tuilete yes no, my friend, munacheza na timu hasla. Tutaiangusha zero, itakuwa ni yes, itakuwa zero hapa. Nataka niwahakikishie kuwa 2022 sisi tuliambiwa 2013, 2017 tukaambiwa kuwa ni 10 ya mheshimiwa wetu rais ambaye tunampenda. Sasa tuko na deni. Deni yetu ni kiongozi ambaye ni Daktari William Samoei Ruto. Na lazima tuhakikishe tumelipa deni.
Moving on, the Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims, SUPKEM, has rejected the BBI report, terming it unimportant during the COVID-19 pandemic. They have called handshake partners President Uhuru Kenyatta and ODM Boswell Odinga to call off the process and instead focus on fighting COVID-19 that is ravaging the country, Andrew Kero explains.
Muslim leaders have rejected the push to amend the constitution through the Building Bridges Initiative BBI, saying the envisioned constitutional amendment will not bring any reforms. The religious leaders said their surge in coronavirus infections, it's not the right time to carry out fundamental constitutional reforms.
I think the president must be conscious that to save the life of Kenya is more important than to change the constitution at this particular time. The constitution belongs to the people of Kenya. And the people of Kenya are saying daily, they are pleading and begging, please stop this process.
Addressing a press conference today in Nairobi, the leaders tore into the BBI report, terming it as a document that will claw back the gains the country has made since 2010.
So please, call off this exercise. We can debate about it later on. We can make more proposals, but call it off. If you don't call it off and you think it's absolutely crucial, which we still beg you not to do, then the question of locking up the door and locking people out should be looked at in great ways.
The leaders said if the BBI constitutional amendments are entrenched, the office of the president will be very powerful, making it very attractive and a potential avenue for violent elections.
BBI will bring an imperial president, which makes Kenyans have rejected. BBI will weaken the checks and balances in government. We are therefore calling on BBI agitates to go back to the drawing board and relook at the proposals.
The Hiver said BBI would lead to the legislature to being under the capture of the executive, weakening its role of representing Mwananchi issues and oversight excesses of the executive. Andrew Carroll, Switch TV.
Thank you, Andrew Carroll, for that story. For a couple of years now, SABASABA market in SABASABA town, Maragua constituency, Murang'a County, has been facing acute water shortage, forcing traders to risk and use waters from unknown sources. Let's take a look.
The traders of this market have decried series of problems, from inadequate toilets, lack of shades to cover them, from hot sun and heavy rains, and the muddy market ground make their work difficult, especially when it rains.
Wakati kumenyesha, tunanyeshewa, hata tunafunga kazi, tunanunua makaratasi, bei ghali ya kufunikia, lakini bado vitu zetu zinanyeshewa. Kama mimi nauzaga mali.
Choo yetu imejaa tayari, na ni moja tu. Sasa hata ukiingia una shida utaenda wapi? Manake lazima uchukue kijiti, usindirie, uone pahali utawekelea yako. Tafadhali, mimi namuomba mkuja mtutengenezee.
And due to COVID-19 pandemic, their businesses have not been spared. Murang'a South Water and Sanitation Company has connected the market with water and installed water tanks, where traders now are getting plenty of water for free.
Tunashukuru ni kwa ajili ya hii maji, juu tutakuwa tukinawa mikono, tukikaa tunanawa mikono, tukienda kwa choo tunanawa mikono, na tutadumisha usafi.
They are now appealing to both the county government of Murang'a and the national government to consider putting a modern SABASABA market for them to continue sustaining the county's economy. Nyakundi Calvin, Switch TV.
Thank you, Nyakundi Calvin. Kenya is in talks with the IMF to secure another loan facility to cushion its economy from the coronavirus pandemic crisis. This is despite the widening budget deficit that by September was at 7.5% and is projected to grow due to the coronavirus disruptions and businesses causing a decline in revenue. Jean Kutuni looks into the story, and here is the report.
As the coronavirus pandemic hit the country, businesses were closed, jobs were lost, and generally the economy was crippled, resulting to financial stress. The revenues fell short of the target. For example, the projected figure for the third quarter dropped from the anticipated 428.9 billion shillings to 378.7 billion shillings. With the financial distress going on, different sectors and different owners are looking up to the government to revive the dying economy. The counties are also at a standstill with no developments going on, and the National Treasury is seeking for ways to cushion the country from going into a deeper recession. Kenya had earlier been invited to accept the debt relief, a $200 billion initiative by the World Health Organization and the G20 country groups that is seeking to help poor countries to sustain its economies from the effects of the coronavirus. But the terms of the existing Eurobond loan has been idle in the acquisition of the debt relief. However, the IMF and the World Bank are set to continue in talks in the coming weeks to help Kenya work around offsetting its Eurobond debt worth 652.7 billion shillings. a move that has triggered mixed reactions from financial analysts, with some claiming the country has to strain in the short term but be saved in the long term, and some say this is a red flag and the decision will bury the country in a long-term debt crisis. That tension now is majorly in the growing budget deficit that was by September at 7.5% and is projected to worsen with time. Reporting for Switch TV, my name is Joanne Kutun.
With John Couture story, now take a short commercial break. Stay tuned, we'll be back with more. Welcome back and thank you for keeping it Switch TV. We are live on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter at Switch TV Kenya. You can send in your feedback to our SMS line 111 that's Switch TV Kenya, and at Lincoln Umbogo on all my social media handles. On more stories, detectives have arrested 44 school-going children at a house in Mountain View, Nairobi, in the ongoing crackdown on individuals taking advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic to engage children in entertainment and partying activities. The police seized BHANG and various brands of alcohol. The children, aged between 14 and 17 years, were arrested alongside their host, who is a 41-year-old woman. Our reporter Majibu Kitsao has the details.
The net raid by police saw 44 school arrested at a house in Mountain View area here in Nairobi, alongside their host, a 41-year-old woman. Preliminary investigations, however, revealed that the children were from Nairobi, Kiambu and Machakos counties. At the house where they were arrested, bottles of different brands of alcohol were scattered all over, a clear indication of what had transpired that night. Now, this is the house where the 44, 26 boys and 18 girls were suspected to be having their party before police raided this area and took them to the police station. At Kabete police station, where the accused are forced to talk to them, however, bore no fruits, as police still insisted on their privacy. Different brands of whiskey, vodka, rolls of bang and used condoms are among the things seized by police during the raid.
And these children, some of them are in primary school, while others are in secondary schools. All do not come from Nairobi. We have some even coming from as far as Machakos. Our officers are on the ground trying to unravel whatever has been happening. I believe the nation is concerned, and we are also concerned, and that is why we've decided to embark on this.
Now, this brings about many questions on why the woman agreed to host these teenagers, and how did the 44 travel that far without raising suspicion from their parents. It is now upon each and every parent to take keen interest in their children's activities as schools remain closed due to COVID-19 fears. Majibu Kitsao, Switch TV News, Nairobi.
Thank you, Majibu Kitsao. G20 nations have emphasized on the need for global access to coronavirus vaccines at a Saudi-hosted virtual summit dominated by efforts to tackle the pandemic and the worst global recession in decades. Ethiopia's government claimed advances in its battle against the dissident Tigray region on Saturday, while showing no signs of bowing to international pressure for a halt to the conflict that has caused tens of thousands to flee and raised fears of a humanitarian disaster. For these and more stories, here's our Africa Weekly Roundup.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has called on the G20 leaders to invest substantially in the World Health Organization's ACT Accelerator, and says his country looks to G20 leaders and international financed institutions to work with African countries to help them rebuild their economies that were deeply impacted by the pandemic.
We look to the G20, international partners, and the international finance institutions to work with African countries to help them rebuild their economy.
Ethiopia's government claimed advances in its battle against the dissident Tigray region on Saturday, while showing no signs of bowing to international pressure for a halt to the conflict that has caused tens of thousands to flee and raised fears of a humanitarian disaster. The regional capital is the seat of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, which the government is seeking to dislodge from power. A communications blackout in the region has made assertions from both sides in the conflict difficult to verify. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed unleashed a military campaign against the TPLF on November 4th, accusing its forces of attacking 2 federal military camps in the region and the party of defying his government and seeking to destabilize it. The TPLF led the overthrow of Mengistu Haile Mariam, head of Ethiopia's military Derg regime, in 1991 and dominated the country's politics until Abiy became prime minister in 2018. The people of Burkina Faso began voting in general election today in the shadow of a growing militia insurgency and with opposition candidates warning of a massive fraud at the polls. President Macron is expected to win re-election, his supporters taking up his chances of an outright victory in the first round of voting. The violence has forced 1 million people, 5% of the 20 million population, from their homes in the last 2 years, and at least 1,200 have been killed since 2015. Uganda's opposition presidential candidate Bobi Wine was defiant Friday after being released on bail following violent clashes between security forces and his supporters that left at least 37 people.
Thank you, Safi Gudana. That's my producer, Safi Gudana, with our landmark roundup of events that happened in Africa this week. Moving on, the U.S. state of Georgia has completed a manual recount of all the ballots cast there in the presidential election, and the results confirm that Joe Biden won in the state. The confirmation makes Biden the first Democratic presidential candidate to win the southern U.S. state in almost 3 decades, despite his rival Donald Trump's claims of fraud. A defiant Donald Trump again falsely insisted he won re-election in his first public appearance for a week on Friday, as the U.S. president appeared increasingly isolated over his long-shot bid to stay in power, claiming against all odds that a path to victory remains viable and facing pushback from fellow Republicans alarmed by his effort to overturn results. Trump invited Michigan lawmakers to the White House on Friday as part of a bid to subvert the will of voters in key states.
Like other Republicans, I'm disappointed our candidate didn't win Georgia's electoral votes. Close elections sow distrust. People feel their side was cheated. We saw this from the Democrats in 2018, and we see this from Republicans today. Working as an engineer throughout my life, I lived by the motto that numbers don't lie. As Secretary of State, I believe that the numbers that we have presented today are correct. The numbers reflect the verdict of the people, not a decision by the Secretary of State's office or of courts or of either campaigns. The audit revealed that in some counties, not all the votes had been counted. That doesn't mean those counties had systemic problems, but it does raise a concern. We must implement a reconciliation process that prevents such errors from happening in the future.
Moving on, Saudi King Salman opened the G20 summit on Saturday in a first for an Arab nation, with a virtual forum dominated by efforts to tackle the coronavirus crisis and the worst global recession in decades. G20 leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, who is refusing to concede a bitter election, popped up in multiple windows across the flickering screen in a high-stakes webinar held amid the raging pandemic.
Il ne faut pas oublier, au-delà du vaccin, de la recherche, que cette coopération doit aussi s'étendre au traitement et au système.
Finally, I would like to remind everyone that all the efforts that we could make to ensure the availability of vaccine doses in these countries will be ineffective if at the same time we do not decide to stabilize, strengthen and sometimes rebuild their primary health systems. And that is why we, the G20 economies, also need to invest much more through our public and development aid in these primary health systems and their reconstruction.
Si dans le même temps, nous ne décidons pas de stabiliser, renforcer, parfois reconstruire leur système de santé primaire.
As Italy faces a second wave of coronavirus, the intensive care units at the Casa Local Clinical Institute in Rome are under pressure. One of the doctors explained that there has been a dizzying increase in hospitalizations and one cannot tell when the peak will be reached, or it has been reached already or will be reached in a week's time.
Faced with a dysfunctional health system and the resignation of 3 local leaders, international NGO emergency, which specializes in providing health care to victims of war, poverty and landmines, has agreed to help out in Calabria, including by providing field hospitals.
Al momento attuale tutti I posti sono saturi, quindi noi non abbiamo più posti letto.
At the moment, all the beds are full. We have no more room available. What saves us is that there is a rather rapid turnover. And this turnover has been made possible, on the other one hand, thanks to the nature and development of this new wave, which is slightly different from the first one. On the other hand, thanks to the fact that there are legal provisions and procedures that have diversified. But its surgeon founder, Gino Strada, veteran of health crisis in Sudan and Rwanda, denied he was being lined as health commissioner for the southern region after a series of chaotic postings. Calabria, the toe of Italy's boat, was spared the worst when the country became the first in Europe to be hit by coronavirus early this year. But as cases again rise nationwide, with more than 32,000 recorded on Tuesday, Calabria is ill-prepared and has been placed under the government's toughest red zone restrictions. Doctor shortages, chronic mismanagement and pervasive infiltration by the 'Ndrangheta, Italy's most powerful organized crime syndicate, have weighed for decades on the local health system.
Pazienti, ad esempio, che stanno in buone condizioni cliniche, sono guariti.
For example, patients who are in good clinical condition and who are cured from a respiratory and general point of view, but who are not yet negative, may decide on a voluntary basis to go to a hotel residence or to return home when family conditions permit. In recent weeks, the system has also become a byword for managerial incompetence, as not one but 3 local health commissioners quit. Eugenio Guaido, a doctor and former rector of Rome's prestigious La Sapienza University, stepped down on Tuesday after barely a day in the post, saying his wife did not want to move. His predecessor, Giuseppe Zuccarelli, quit on Monday after a furor over remarks he made questioning the usefulness of masks, which are mandatory in all public places in Italy. Zuccarelli also suggested coronavirus could only be passed on by kissing someone with tongues for at least 15 or 20 minutes.
Mentre prima il decesso era un evento, non voglio dire raro.
Whereas before death was, let's say, an event, I don't want to say rare, but it was infrequent. Now it's really becoming a situation we'll never get used to, but it's becoming very frequent.
Alla quale noi non ci abitueremo mai, però di fatto è diventato frequentissimo.
His predecessor, Saverio Kotkel, appointed in 2018, was fired in early November after a television interview in which he appeared unaware that it was his job to develop a plan to tackle coronavirus.
Più veloce. La cosa che incideva in un senso contrario prima, nella prima ondata, è che
What's different from the first wave is the average age of the patients. During the first wave, these were much older patients, and they needed to stay in hospital longer. Because, of course, it's not enough to be negative on the PCR test, but there must also be general conditions that allow a doctor to let a patient leave the hospital, that he or she is in a condition that allows them to be at home, and that they do not need a specific medical assistance for this pathology. Healthy policy is usually controlled by Italy's regions, but for the last decade, the central government in Rome has ruled services in Calabria. The region, Italy's poorest, has the highest rate of unemployment at 21% in 2019, compared with 10% nationally. Among young people, it's 30.6% compared with 14.8% nationwide.
Many thanks for staying with us. My name is Cedric Oronje, and now let's get sporty. Bruno Fernandes, twice taken second-half penalty, steered Manchester United to their first Premier League victory of the season at Old Trafford against West Brom Albion in an encounter that saw former United keeper Sam Johnston bag a string of superb stops to deny his old club, including a splendid save from Fernandes' initial kick.
Afternoon. Gallagher. And that curler from Robinson off the woodwork. What a fantastic effort from the substitute. An absolute screamer that. Martial, he finds Bruno Fernandes. Bruno Fernandes. Rashford surely for 2. Oh, stunning from Johnston.
Glory, glory, Man United, that's all they say. And now a brace from Calvert Lewin and a solo from Abulaye Dokure ensured Everton moved 3 points clear to 6.